Brookings published an analysis in January that contained a sentence I have not been able to stop thinking about since I read it. They said that healthy job growth in the United States could fall to zero or even turn negative by 2027. Zero. That is not a recession forecast. That is not a pessimistic projection from a fringe economist. That is a structural assessment from one of the most respected policy research institutions in the world based on the collapse of immigration inflows, the aging of the domestic workforce, and the accelerating displacement of human labor by artificial intelligence. And it is not the only indicator pointing to 2027 as the dividing line between the America we recognize and the one we will not. The Medicaid work requirements take effect no later than January 1, 2027, triggering the largest healthcare coverage disruption in modern American history. The major Medicaid funding cuts begin in October 2027, reducing federal spending on healthcare for low-income Americans by nearly $1 trillion over the next decade. The Social Security Trust Fund is projected to deplete by 2033, but the new senior tax deduction in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act will hasten that timeline by up to 6 months, and the Motley Fool reported that the timeline seems to be speeding up. The IMF concluded that the combined effect of current policy changes is expected to lead to lower real disposable income for the bottom half of the income distribution after 2029. And the CBO projects that from 2028 to 2036, payroll employment will grow at an average of just 44,000 jobs per month, which is slower than any sustained period in modern American economic history. And I am going to tell you something that I do not say lightly and that I have spent months researching before committing to. 2026 is the last normal year, not the last good year. Normal stopped being good a long time ago. But the last year in which the fundamental structures that American families depend on, health care coverage, food assistance, Social Security solvency, job availability, and the basic assumption that tomorrow will look roughly like today are still intact. By January 1, 2027, several of those structures will begin breaking. And by 2028, the landscape will be so different from what Americans over 50 grew up expecting that the concept of normal itself will need to be redefined. And most people have no idea this is happening because the changes were designed to take effect gradually, one deadline at a time, one provision at a time, one system at a time, so that no single moment feels like the tipping point. But when you line up every deadline, every policy implementation, every structural economic shift on a single timeline, the pattern is unmistakable. 2026 is the last year before the break. And I want to define what I mean by normal because I am not using the word carelessly. Normal is not good. Normal in 2026 means 7 in 10 Americans are struggling with food, housing, and health care, according to CBS News. Normal means consumer prices are 26% above 2019. Normal means $1.21 trillion in credit card debt at 22.76% interest. Normal means ACA premiums doubled for 20 million people on January 1st. Normal means gas at $5. Normal means 734 rural hospitals at risk of closing. That is normal. And I am telling you that as bad as normal is right now, it is the last version of the economy that still resembles the one you grew up in. Because the structural changes that take effect in 2027 and 2028 are not incremental adjustments to the current system. They are fundamental restructurings of how healthcare is delivered, how employment functions, how retirement is funded, and how the cost of living is determined. And each one of those restructurings makes the system permanently harder for the average American family. Not temporarily harder, permanently. And the families that use 2026 to prepare for what 2027 brings will be positioned to survive it. And the families that assume 2027 will look like 2026 will be devastated by the gap between what they expected and what arrives. 2027. The year healthcare stops being a right you earned and becomes a privilege you must prove you deserve every 6 months. On January 1, 2027, Medicaid work requirements take full effect across every state. Adults aged 19 to 64 must document 80 hours per month of work, community service, or half-time student enrollment to maintain their Medicaid coverage. KFF projects that 5.3 million people will lose coverage directly because of these requirements. States must conduct Medicaid eligibility redeterminations every 6 months instead of annually, doubling the paperwork burden on every enrollee and doubling the opportunities for administrative failure to terminate coverage. And the people who lose Medicaid coverage due to work requirements are specifically barred from receiving ACA marketplace premium tax credits. They fall into a gap with no coverage on either side. On October 1, 2027, the major Medicaid funding cuts begin. Federal funding for Medicaid is reduced by nearly $1 trillion over the next decade. The Commonwealth Fund estimates that the 2026 Medicaid cuts alone could cost states nearly 900,000 jobs and more than $100 billion in GDP. And the 734 rural hospitals at risk of closing will face even more severe financial pressure as the Medicaid revenue they depend on is cut. More hospitals will close, more maternity wards will be eliminated, more emergency departments will shut down. And the healthcare system that exists in 2026, damaged as it already is, will be substantially smaller, less accessible, and more expensive in 2027 and 2028. That is the healthcare landscape on the other side of the normal line. And the families who are accustomed to Medicaid being available when they need it, who assume that the emergency room down the road will still be there next year, who believe that their chronic condition will continue to be managed by a system that has managed it for years, are living in the last year where those assumptions hold. On January 1, 2027, the assumptions break. Not all at once, but enough of them. For enough people, to produce a healthcare system that no longer resembles what Americans have known for the past 50 years. And once the coverage is lost and the hospitals are closed and the workers have left, rebuilding the system to what it was in 2026 would take a decade of sustained investment that nobody is proposing. The destruction is faster than the construction, and the destruction begins in 9 months. And I want to make this concrete for people who think the Medicaid changes will not affect them personally. If you are on employer-provided health insurance, the Medicaid cuts still affect you because when millions of people lose Medicaid coverage, they do not stop getting sick. They show up at emergency rooms because emergency rooms cannot legally turn them away, and the cost of that uncompensated emergency care is absorbed by the hospital. And the hospital recovers that cost by raising prices for insured patients, and the insurer passes those higher prices to employers, and the employer passes those higher costs to employees through premium increases, higher deductibles, and reduced benefits. The Congressional Budget Office has documented this cost shift repeatedly. Every uninsured person who uses the emergency room increases the cost of your employer-provided insurance. And the Medicaid cuts will create millions of newly uninsured people simultaneously, and the cost shift from their uncompensated care will hit your premium the following year. That is why the Medicaid cuts affect every American, not just the people on Medicaid. The cost of a less insured population is distributed across the entire healthcare system, and the distribution arrives on your insurance statement in 2028 as a premium increase that nobody can explain to you because the connection between Medicaid cuts and employer premiums is invisible to the person paying the bill. But the connection is real, and the cost is real, and it is coming. The job market you knew is ending, and the one replacing it will not support the life you planned. Goldman Sachs estimates that AI is displacing 16,000 jobs per month. Stanford's Institute for Economic Policy Research described the current labor market as a low-hire, low-fire equilibrium, meaning companies are not laying people off in waves, but they are simply not hiring. Average monthly employment growth has been just 17,000 since April 2025, a level that historically would signal a labor market in crisis. And Brookings said the sustainable pace of job creation could fall to zero or negative by 2027 because the dramatic decline in immigration has fundamentally changed what constitutes healthy job growth. The CBO projects average job growth of just 44,000 per month from 2028 to 2036 because of the aging population and weaker demand for labor. And the IMF lowered its estimate of medium-term U.S. potential growth by a 0.25 percentage point relative to their previous assessment. And the jobs that are being created are increasingly concentrated in healthcare, which is itself being cut, and in sectors that pay less than the jobs they replaced. The 58-year-old whose white-collar knowledge work position was eliminated by AI does not transition to a healthcare aide position at $17 per hour. They enter a labor market that does not value their experience, that screens them out by age before the interview, and that offers positions at 20 to 25% below the income their financial plan was built on. And the financial plan, the mortgage, the insurance, the retirement contributions, the children's education savings, does not adjust to the lower income. The obligations remain at the level set by the higher income, and the gap between the two is filled by savings depletion, retirement account raids, and credit card accumulation at 22.76%. And that gap is not temporary because the jobs that were displaced by AI are not coming back. They are permanently eliminated. The work is being done by a system that does not need health insurance, does not need a salary, does not need a lunch break, and improves its own capabilities every month. And the displaced worker is competing for the remaining human jobs against every other displaced worker in their field in a market where the supply of workers exceeds the demand for work. And the CBO confirmed this is structural, not cyclical. The U.S. population is aging. Birth rates are declining. Net immigration is projected at negative 330,000 in 2026 and 2027. The working age population is shrinking while the retired population grows. Fewer workers paying into Social Security and Medicare while more retirees draw from them. And the AI systems that replace the workers do not pay Social Security taxes. They do not pay Medicare taxes. They do not spend wages at local businesses. They do not rent apartments or buy groceries. They generate profit for shareholders, not communities. And each wave of job displacement was supposed to be offset by new, better jobs. But the gap between displacement and creation is widening. AI automates information tasks and creates nothing that requires a human at scale. That is the labor market of 2027. That is the labor market of 2027. And it looks nothing like 2019 or 2020 or 2021. It looks like the permanent restructuring of how America creates employment. And the families whose income plans were built on the assumption that mid-career professional employment would continue at current compensation levels until retirement are living in the last year where that assumption still holds for most of them. By 2027, the AI displacement curve will have steepened. By 2028, the CBO project's job growth will have slowed to levels that cannot absorb normal population growth. And by 2030, the labor market will have permanently restructured around AI capabilities that make entire categories of human work unnecessary. Social Security is not just threatened, it is on a countdown that Congress has actively accelerated, and the clock runs out inside your retirement. The Social Security Trust Fund is projected to deplete by the first quarter of 2033. That is less than 7 years from today, and the Motley Fool reported that several developments have made the problem worse over the past year and that the timeline seems to be speeding up. The Social Security Fairness Act increased benefits for some recipients. The new senior tax deduction in the OBBBA costs Social Security $168.6 billion in lost tax revenue over the next decade and hastens the depletion by up to 6 months. And declining birth rates mean the working age population is set to grow at a slow pace, which means Social Security tax revenue relative to the benefits due will decline as Gen X and millennials reach retirement age. And Kiplinger said politicians are ignoring the flashing red lights and increasingly dire insolvency predictions and have only acted to hasten the depletion. And the reduction in benefits that would be triggered by insolvency could require a 23% cut. The average benefit would drop from approximately $2,071 to approximately $1,595 per month. And a Gen X retiree who depends on Social Security for 40% of their retirement income would need to save an additional $150,000 to cover the shortfall, which translates to $701 per month in additional savings for the years remaining before retirement. And for the majority of Americans who are not saving $701 per month, who are in fact depleting their savings to cover current expenses, the shortfall will be met by reduced spending, extended working years, reliance on family, or poverty. And the 2026 COLA of 2.8% added $56 per month to the average benefit. The Medicare Part B premium increase to $202.90 consumed $18 of it. Groceries consumed the rest before the gas was bought, and this is the last year where the trust fund math still works at current benefit levels. Every year from now until 2033 brings the insolvency closer, and the people who are counting on Social Security to fund their retirement are counting on a system that has a public, documented, scheduled expiration date, and nobody is fixing it. Not this year. Not in the midterm election year. Not ever, apparently, because fixing it requires raising taxes or cutting benefits, and neither party will do either because both options lose votes. So the system drifts toward insolvency while the people who depend on it drift toward retirement. And the two will meet in approximately 2033. And when they meet, the 23% cut will arrive. Not as a warning, as a check that is 23% smaller than the one you received the month before. That is the Social Security landscape on the other side of normal. And you are living in the last year before the countdown becomes impossible to ignore. And here is what makes 2026 the critical year for Social Security decisions that most people are not making. If you are between 62 and 67 right now, you are in the window where the decision of when to claim Social Security benefits will determine your income for the rest of your life. And that decision, which was already the most consequential financial decision most retirees face, has become exponentially more complex because the trust fund depletion adds a variable that no previous generation of retirees had to consider. Do you claim early at 62 and accept the reduced benefit because you fear the 23% cut will happen before you would have received the higher benefit? Or do you delay to 67 or 70 to maximize the monthly check, betting that Congress will act before 2033 to prevent the cut? Neither answer is obviously correct. And 77% of older adults told AARP that the 2.8% COLA would not be enough to keep up with rising prices. And the Medicare Part B premium rose 9.7% to $202.90, consuming a third of the COLA increase. And the families making this decision right now are making it in 2026, the last year before the Medicaid changes, and the job market deterioration and the cost increases make the calculation even harder. Every year of delay makes the math worse because every year brings the trust fund closer to depletion, while the costs that the benefit is supposed to cover continue rising faster than the COLA adjusts. The cost of everything is permanently higher, and the mechanisms that would bring it down have been deliberately dismantled. Consumer prices are 26% above 2019 levels. The IMF confirmed that the combined effect of Medicaid reductions, food assistance cuts, and tariffs will result in materially lower real disposable incomes for the bottom third of the income distribution and an increase in the poverty rate. And after 2029, when the more progressive income tax provisions in the OBBBA are scheduled to expire, the combined effect will lead to lower real disposable income for the bottom half of the income distribution. Not the bottom third. The bottom half. 50% of American families will have less purchasing power after 2029 than they have today. And the mechanisms that historically brought costs down, competition, deregulation, technological efficiency, and monetary policy, are all either broken or working in the opposite direction. Competition is declining as market concentration increases in healthcare, insurance, banking, and food production. The deregulatory agenda is focused on removing consumer protections that limited the ability of corporations to raise prices, not on increasing competition. The technological efficiency gains from AI are flowing to corporate profits, not to consumer prices. And monetary policy is being directed by political pressure to cut rates, which stimulates asset prices and borrowing but does nothing to reduce the cost of groceries, gas, insurance, or healthcare. The EV tax credits that helped reduce transportation costs were eliminated. The home energy efficiency credits that reduced utility bills were eliminated. The clean energy tax credits that were lowering electricity generation costs are being phased out. Every mechanism that was designed to reduce the cost of living for middle-class families has been either cut, defunded, or allowed to expire. And the costs themselves continue rising. The SNAP benefit formula is being frozen, which means food assistance will not adjust for the actual cost of food. The Medicaid cuts will increase the number of uninsured, which increases the cost of emergency care, which is passed through to insured patients as higher premiums. The tariffs add $9,200 to $17,500 to every new home, reducing supply and increasing prices. And a grid policy expert told Governing Magazine that it is hard to see utility bills coming down this decade. Not this year. This decade, the elevated cost of living is not a temporary spike. It is the new permanent baseline from which future increases begin. And the families that structured their financial lives around 2019 cost levels, who assumed that prices would come back down, who believed that the affordability crisis would resolve, are living in the last year before the finality of that assumption becomes undeniable. Prices are not coming back. Costs are not returning to 2019, and the purchasing power that was lost over the past 6 years is not being recovered because the wage growth that would be needed, more than 60% according to Fannie Mae, is not happening and is not projected to happen by any major forecaster. And I want to put a number on what that permanent cost increase means for a specific family. A family of 4 that spent $800 per month on groceries in 2019 now spends approximately $1,010. That is $2,520 per year in additional grocery costs that is permanent. Their health insurance premium that was $650 per month is now $1,300. That is $7,800 per year in additional insurance costs. Their electric bill that averaged $180 per month is now $265. That is $1,020 per year in additional electricity costs. Their gas that cost $2.50 is now $5. On 15,000 miles per year at 25 miles per gallon, that is an additional $1,500 per year. Add it up. $2,520 in groceries, $7,800 in insurance, $1,020 in electricity, $1,500 in gas. That is $12,840 per year in additional costs on a household whose income has not increased by $12,840. And that $12,840 comes from somewhere. It comes from savings that are depleted, from retirement contributions that are paused, from credit card balances that accumulate, from the financial plan that was built on 2019 costs and cannot be rebuilt on 2026 costs because the income has not kept pace. And the families that are absorbing this $12,840 per year increase in 2026, the last normal year, will face additional increases in 2027 when the Medicaid cuts produce higher uncompensated care costs that are passed through to insured patients as higher premiums. And in 2028 when the SNAP state funding mandates either raise state taxes or eliminate food assistance. And the compounding of cost increases on top of cost increases on top of cost increases without commensurate income growth is the mechanism by which the middle class is permanently restructured, not by one catastrophic event, by 6 years of relentless compounding that eventually exceeds the capacity of a normal household income to sustain. What you can do in the last normal year to prepare for the America that comes after. I have described what is ending. The healthcare system as you knew it, the job market as you planned for it, the Social Security system as you were promised it, the cost structure that your financial plan was built on, all of them are changing permanently. And 2026 is the last year where the old assumptions still roughly hold. By 2027, the Medicaid coverage that millions depend on will be conditioned on work documentation. By 2028, the job growth rate will have slowed to levels below population growth. By 2033, the Social Security Trust Fund will deplete and benefits will be cut 23%. And the cost of everything will remain permanently elevated above the levels that current household budgets were designed to sustain. That is the future, and you cannot prevent it. But you can prepare for it, and the preparation must happen this year, not next year. This year, because 2026 is the last year where the window is open. First, maximize every retirement contribution you can. If you are over 50, you can contribute $23,500 to a 401k plus a $7,500 catch-up contribution. Every dollar contributed in 2026 has one more year of compounding before the Social Security shortfall arrives. The math is urgent. Second, if you depend on Medicaid, prepare for the work documentation requirement before it takes effect in January 2027. Gather your records. Understand your state's exemption criteria. Do not wait for the letter. Third, reduce your cost of living now while the choices are still voluntary. The families that downsize, relocate, consolidate, or restructure their expenses before the crisis forces them to will do so on their terms at their pace with their choices intact. The families that wait will do so under duress, at speed, with limited options. Voluntary restructuring is always better than forced restructuring. Always. Fourth, diversify your income. If your household depends on a single earner in a role that AI could displace, begin building a second income stream now. Not as a hobby, as insurance against the structural shift that is coming for white-collar employment in 2027 and 2028. The income diversification that feels optional in 2026 becomes essential in 2028. Start now while it is still optional. Fifth, build community. The institutional safety nets are being cut. The government safety nets are being cut. The corporate safety nets never existed. The only safety net that cannot be legislated away is the one built between neighbors, between families, between friends who commit to helping each other through what is coming. That net is the one that will matter most, and it is the one that requires nothing but willingness and trust. Build it now, before you need it. I want to close with a message for the Americans over 50 who are watching this video right now. You are living through the end of something. Not the end of America, not the end of hope, the end of normal. The specific, familiar, predictable normal that defined the second half of the 20th century and the first quarter of the 21st. The normal where you worked for one or two companies for 30 years and retired with a pension or a 401k and Social Security and Medicare. The normal where healthcare was expensive but accessible, where food was always on the shelves, where the electric bill was manageable, where the government programs that your taxes funded were available when you needed them. That normal is ending, and what replaces it will be defined by the decisions that are made in the next 12 to 18 months, by the policies that take effect in 2027 and 2028, by the structural economic shifts that the CBO and the IMF and Brookings and Stanford are all documenting in real time. And the families that use this last normal year to prepare for what comes next, to maximize their savings, to secure their health care, to diversify their income, to build their community, to make the voluntary changes now that will be forced later, those families will carry the resilience they built in 2026 into the decades that follow. And the families that assume tomorrow will look like today, that prices will come back down, that Social Security will be fixed, that their job is secure, that the hospital will still be there, that the system will continue functioning as it always has, those families will discover sometime in 2027 or 2028 that the normal they assumed was permanent was already ending while they were watching. This video is my attempt to make sure you are not one of those families, because you deserve the truth. And the truth is that 2026 is the last year that looks like the one before it. Use it well. Use it wisely. Use every month, every week, every paycheck to position yourself and your family for the America that is coming. Not the one you grew up in, the new one, the harder one, the one where nothing is guaranteed and everything must be earned and protected and defended every single day. You can do this. You have survived harder things, but you survived them because you saw them coming and you acted. See this one coming and act. Share this video with every American over 50 you know, because the last normal year is not a gift if you do not know it is happening. It is only a gift if you use it. Subscribe and turn on notifications. I am going to keep tracking every structural shift, every policy deadline, every economic indicator that defines the transition from the America you know to the America that is coming. No spin, no party line. Just the permanent truth about what is changing and what can still be saved. Take care of yourselves out there. Use this year. It is the last one like it. The last year where the structures still hold. The last year where the assumptions still roughly apply. The last year where preparation is still possible before the changes take effect. After this year, the preparation window closes and the adaptation period begins. And adaptation is always harder, always more expensive, and always more painful than preparation. Choose preparation. Choose it now.